The colony world had once been a place of peace and hope. Families had traveled across the stars to settle there, believing they were building a future far away from war and conflict. For years, the colony thrived. Crops grew, trade routes were set up, and children laughed in the streets of its shining cities. But all of that changed when the enemy came. They arrived without warning, their ships blotting out the stars as they descended upon the planet. The skies lit up with fire as orbital bombardments tore through defenses and buildings alike. The colony had a small fleet of ships meant only for patrols and escort duties. They were not designed to fight a full invasion. When the enemy attacked, those ships tried bravely to defend their home, but one by one they were destroyed. The sky above the planet became a graveyard of broken hulls and shattered dreams. The survivors on the ground could do nothing but watch helplessly as the fleet they depended on was annihilated. The cities suffered next. Towers of glass and steel crumbled under the relentless assault. Markets, schools, and homes, all places filled with life just days earlier, were reduced to rubble. Smoke filled the air, carrying the bitter stench of fire and ash. Survivors ran through the ruins, clutching what little they could save. A child's hand, a bag of food, a single memory of what life had been before the invasion. Every corner of the colony was touched by despair. Families huddled together in basements, listening to the thunder of enemy footsteps drawing closer. Soldiers, too few and too poorly armed, tried to hold the lines but were quickly overwhelmed. The enemy forces showed no mercy. Villages were burned, settlements erased, and the wounded left behind. Each passing hour made the colonists realize the terrible truth. They could not hold out much longer. In the governor's command center, the remaining leaders argued about their options. Some begged for surrender, hoping mercy might be shown. Others argued that surrender would only mean slavery or execution. At last, one decision was made. They would send out a call for help, not just to nearby allies, but to anyone who might hear. It would be a desperate plea, a cry into the void of space sent on every frequency they could reach. The message was simple but heartbreaking. We are under attack. Our defenses are destroyed. Our people are dying. Please, anyone, come to our aid before it is too late. The signal went out, carried by satellites and transmitters, pushed with every ounce of power they had left. The colonists waited, their eyes on the skies, hoping to see the shimmer of Allied ships breaking through the darkness. Days passed with no answer. The people grew weaker. Supplies dwindled, and every night the enemy pressed harder against the last pockets of resistance. Yet hope is a stubborn thing. Even as they starved, even as fear gnawed at them, many still whispered that help would come. They imagined medical ships arriving, filled with doctors to treat the wounded and feed the hungry. They dreamed of convoys carrying supplies, food, water, and medicine. At best, some thought, maybe a small fleet would come, just enough to push the enemy back long enough for evacuation. None dared to imagine more than that. Children asked their parents when the ships would arrive, and parents lied gently, saying soon. Soldiers told each other that reinforcements were on the way. Even as their ammunition ran low, the leaders of the colony clung to the idea that the galaxy would not ignore them. Surely someone would hear, surely someone would come. But beneath that fragile hope, fear lived. What if no one came at all? What if their desperate cry was lost in the endless sea of stars? The thought of being alone, abandoned in their darkest hour, made the silence from the skies even more painful. And then one night, the silence broke. A faint signal was detected on the long-range scanners. The technicians hardly believed it at first, thinking it might be interference or a trick of the enemy. But no, it was real. Ships were coming. Reinforcements had answered their call. Word spread like fire through the ruins. People cheered, hugged one another, and for the first time in weeks allowed themselves to believe they might survive. No one knew who exactly had answered, or what kind of help they were bringing. Most assumed it would be what they expected: convoys with food, medics with healing supplies, or a token squadron to delay the enemy. It didn't matter. Anything was better than nothing. Anything was better than facing the end alone. Mothers soothed their crying children with promises that tomorrow would be safer. Wounded soldiers clenched their fists and swore they would hold on just one more day. Across the colony, hope returned like a spark in the darkness. They had called for backup, and backup was coming. But as the ships drew closer, as the scanners picked up their size and formation, confusion began to spread among the defenders watching the skies. This was not what they had expected. These were not the sleek medical cruisers or humble relief convoys they had dreamed of. The approaching fleet was larger, heavier, and far more dangerous looking. At first, no one understood. The colonists could only stare at the glowing trails cutting across the stars, wondering what kind of help had truly answered their call. They had asked for backup. They had begged for anyone to save them. But what came through the void was something no one could have anticipated. The first signs of help came through the scanners, a faint signal, then multiple, growing stronger with each passing hour. At first, the colonists were filled with relief. They had been waiting so long, praying for anyone to answer their call, and now their prayers had finally been heard. The governor's staff, exhausted and hollow-eyed, gathered in the control center to confirm the readings. On the screens, bright dots appeared, moving steadily toward the planet. Ships, reinforcements. The news spread quickly across the shattered colony. Survivors hiding in basements lifted their heads, daring to hope. Soldiers clinging to broken barricades allowed themselves a smile. Families whispered to their children that the nightmare would soon be over. They all imagined the same thing. Medical ships landing with doctors and nurses, relief convoys filled with food and clean water, maybe even a few frigates to chase away the enemy long enough for them to breathe again. That was what they expected. Gentle ships, allies bringing mercy. When the incoming fleet drew closer, more details appeared on the scanners. At first, the colonists assumed they must be reading the data wrong. These ships were massive, far larger than the rescue convoys anyone had imagined. Their signatures were heavy with weapons, their designs sharp and brutal. These were not hospital ships. These were not transports carrying aid. They were warships, dozens of them, moving in a formation that spoke of military precision and ruthless intent. The control center fell silent. Technicians stared at their screens with wide eyes. Leaders exchanged uneasy glances. Someone whispered the word humans, and the entire room stiffened. They had all heard the stories, the rumors passed between species in hushed tones. Humanity, the Deathworlders, a people born on a planet so dangerous that everything in their environment had been trying to kill them from the moment they evolved. They were said to be reckless, violent, unpredictable. And worst of all, they never stopped fighting. The colonists had prayed for help, but they had not prayed for this. When the first human ships broke through the atmosphere, the colonists finally saw them with their own eyes. Enormous steel titans, scarred from countless battles, their hulls painted with strange markings that spoke of victories and losses across distant stars. They did not glide gracefully like the ships of other species. They moved like predators, heavy and deliberate, as if daring anything to challenge them. Every inch of their surface bristled with weaponry, missile pods, rail cannons, energy turrets, all designed with one purpose: survival through destruction. From the streets and ruins, survivors looked up at the sky. For a moment, awe filled their hearts. The sheer size and power of the human fleet was breathtaking. Never had they seen such raw strength. But alongside that awe came fear. These were not gentle saviors. These were not the healers and builders they had imagined. These were warriors, and their arrival meant that war was coming in full force. On the ground, whispers spread quickly. Some cheered, convinced that salvation had come in the form of these terrifying giants. Others trembled, wondering if they had invited something even worse than the enemy already burning their world. The old stories resurfaced. Tales of humans surviving poisons that killed others instantly, of them fighting on even after terrible wounds, of them enduring cold, hunger, and pain that no other species could withstand. Humanity was not just another ally. They were something entirely different, something the galaxy had never fully understood. Inside the governor's chamber, debate erupted. Could the humans be trusted? Would they protect the colony, or simply use it as a battlefield to unleash their own fury? No one knew the answer. But as the human ships began to take position above the planet, their intentions became clear. They had come not to negotiate, not to comfort, but to fight. The enemy fleet, which had been circling the colony like vultures, suddenly shifted. They too had seen the arrival of the Deathworlders. Confidence turned into unease, unease into fear. They had fought many opponents across the stars, but the humans were something different. Everyone knew that once Deathworlders entered a battlefield, the fight would never be the same. As the first human warship opened its weapon bays, the colonists finally understood the truth of the rumors. This was not mercy wrapped in soft hands. This was salvation wrapped in steel and fire. Backup had come, yes, but it was not the gentle kind they had envisioned. It was humanity, raw and unrelenting, and their way of helping was through war. Children clutched their parents as the skies above rumbled with the growl of human engines. Soldiers straightened their backs, feeling both relief and dread. And everywhere, in every heart, the same thought took hold. The Deathworlders had arrived. Would they be saviors or destroyers? No one yet knew, but one thing was certain. The war for the colony was about to change forever. The enemy had been sure of their victory. For weeks they had circled the planet, attacking at will, confident that no one could challenge them. They had destroyed the colony's small fleet, burned its cities, and driven its people into hiding. To them, the battle was already won. All that was left was to starve out the survivors and claim the planet for themselves. So when the human warships appeared, the enemy was not afraid. At first they even laughed. In their arrogance, they thought these newcomers would be just another fleet to crush. But they were wrong. The moment the humans entered the fight, the skies turned into chaos. Human warships moved with a kind of ferocity the enemy had never faced before. They didn't fight with caution or hesitation. They attacked like wolves, tearing into the enemy lines with savage precision. Missiles streaked across space, rail cannons roared, and lasers burned through hulls. Entire enemy cruisers were split apart in minutes, their remains scattering like burning debris across the void. The enemy commanders tried to respond. They formed defensive lines, regrouped, and threw everything they had at the humans. But nothing worked. Every tactic they used was countered almost instantly. The humans didn't just fight, they adapted, shifted, and struck where it hurt most. Their strategies were brutal, efficient, and frighteningly effective, born from centuries of surviving wars on a death world where hesitation meant death. To the colonists watching from the ground, the sight was unreal. They had expected a battle between fleets, ships exchanging fire from a distance like the wars they knew of. But the humans fought differently. They closed in, forcing combat at close range, ripping through their enemies with overwhelming firepower. It wasn't just a fight, it was slaughter. The sky lit up with fireballs as enemy ships exploded one after another. Yet the war in orbit was only half the story. On the ground, the humans had already begun their own campaign. Dropships descended through the smoke-filled skies, landing in shattered cities and burning forests. From them emerged soldiers unlike any the colonists had ever seen, heavily armed, covered in armor, their faces hidden behind visors. They moved like predators let loose on new hunting grounds. The enemy, who had dominated the colony for so long, suddenly found themselves hunted. Human soldiers did not meet them head-on in neat battle lines. Instead, they melted into the ruins, disappearing into alleyways and rubble. They turned the broken streets into traps. A collapsed building would hide snipers. A narrow alley would become an ambush. A ruined marketplace would explode with hidden charges when enemy troops marched through. Every step the invaders took became dangerous. The humans fought with a kind of relentlessness that terrified both their enemies and the colonists. They never seemed to tire. They never gave up ground. Even when outnumbered, they fought with such ferocity that the enemy often broke and ran. Colonists hiding in cellars or behind shattered walls saw it all. To them, it was a strange mix of hope and fear. On one hand, the humans were their saviors, driving back the invaders that had nearly destroyed them. On the other, the way they fought was terrifying. The humans did not fight like soldiers. They fought like the very death world that had shaped them, wild, merciless, and unstoppable. Children peeked from basements and saw armored figures moving like shadows, striking down invaders before disappearing again. Farmers hiding in burned-out barns heard the thunder of human guns in the distance, followed by screams of the enemy. Whole groups of colonists huddled together, whispering in awe at the feral courage of their unlikely rescuers. The enemy, once so confident, began to panic. Their commanders shouted orders, but discipline broke under the storm of human attacks. Patrols refused to leave their bases at night, terrified of what might be lurking in the darkness. Supply convoys were ambushed, their vehicles turned into smoking wrecks. Soldiers vanished into the ruins, never seen again. Fear spread through their ranks like a disease. Everywhere the enemy turned, the humans were waiting. They struck quickly, then vanished, never giving their opponents a chance to recover. It was not the organized warfare the colony was used to. It was something older, rawer, almost primal. It was as if the humans were channeling the unforgiving world they came from into every shot fired and every strike made. For the colonists, the war became a nightmare wrapped in salvation. They cheered when they saw enemy ships exploding in the sky, but they also shivered when they saw human warships cutting through fleets without mercy. They were grateful when human soldiers saved them from execution squads, but the look in the humans' eyes, cold, determined, and unyielding, frightened them. The humans had come as allies, yes, but their way of helping was like unleashing a storm. As the days passed, the balance of power shifted completely. The enemy, once so sure of victory, was now on the defensive. Their fleets were broken. Their troops were hunted. Their confidence was shattered. And the colonists, who had once been certain of their doom, now looked to the skies with a mixture of awe and dread. They had asked for help. They had begged for backup, for anyone to come to their rescue. And help had come, but not in the form they had expected. The humans had arrived, and with them came the fury of a death world. It was salvation, yes, but it was also a reminder that the galaxy's most dangerous species had just stepped onto the battlefield. For the colonists watching from the shadows, one truth became clear: humanity was not like anyone else. They were saviors, but they were also a nightmare. And once unleashed, there was no stopping them. When the last explosions faded and the skies grew quiet again, the war was over. The enemy, who had once circled the planet with arrogance, was broken. Their fleets drifted in pieces across orbit, burning wrecks scattered like ashes in the void. The survivors among them fled in panic, their once proud armada reduced to frightened scraps fleeing into the darkness. On the ground, their armies were shattered, retreating in chaos, leaving behind weapons, equipment, and bodies. Humanity had won, but victory came with a cost. The colony was alive, but it was not the same world it had been before. Everywhere, scars of the battle could be seen. Entire cities lay in ruins. Towers that once touched the clouds were now broken spires of twisted metal. Homes were burned-out shells. Streets were lined with craters blackened by fire and bombardment. The land itself seemed wounded, forests reduced to ash and rivers clogged with debris. The colonists stepped out of their hiding places, blinking into the daylight as if afraid the war might return. They were alive, and for that they were grateful. Yet, as they looked around, they realized their survival had come at a terrible price. Their world was scarred not only by the enemy, but by the very fury of the humans who had saved them. The humans did not leave when the fighting ended. They stayed, bringing aid in their own way. Medical stations were set up, and human doctors treated wounds that the colony's own healers could not. Supplies were distributed: food, water, tools, and medicine from human ships. Engineers worked with colonists to rebuild broken power grids, patch water systems, and clear dangerous ruins. In many ways, the humans were tireless in their help. And yet, despite this generosity, unease lingered. The colonists had seen too much during the battles to forget. They remembered the thunder of human guns that tore entire enemy divisions apart. They remembered soldiers who moved like predators, their eyes cold and their hands steady, even as they killed without hesitation. They remembered seeing human ships rain destruction from above with terrifying accuracy, showing no mercy to anything in their path. These memories clung to the survivors like shadows. Whispers began to spread in the streets. Yes, the humans had saved them. Yes, they had brought food and medicine. But what kind of saviors fought with such savagery? Children woke in the night screaming of armored figures with glowing eyes. Farmers spoke quietly of how even after the battle ended, the humans seemed restless, always training, always sharpening their weapons as if war was their natural state of being. Some colonists felt deep gratitude. To them, the humans were angels of war, frightening but necessary. Without them, the colony would have been erased. These people welcomed the aid, worked side by side with human engineers, and offered thanks at every opportunity. But others felt something different. Fear. The enemy had nearly destroyed them, but at least the enemy's cruelty had been expected. The humans, however, were supposed to be allies, and yet their way of helping had left scars almost as deep as those of the invaders. In the governor's hall, leaders debated the meaning of what had happened. One elder stood and said, "We are alive because of them. That is all that matters." Another replied, "Yes, but at what cost? Our children saw horrors they cannot forget. They will grow up knowing salvation came not in kindness but in fire." It was not an easy question to answer. The humans themselves did not apologize. When asked, their commanders simply said, "We did what had to be done. You are alive. That is enough." To them, survival was the only goal, and anything less than absolute victory was failure. The colonists could not deny the truth of that. They were alive. Their people had been saved. Yet the memory of how it happened haunted them. In quiet moments, survivors replayed what they had seen. Humans charging fearlessly into hopeless battles, laughing even in the face of death, refusing to stop until the enemy was destroyed. It was bravery, yes, but also something deeper, something almost frightening in its intensity. As weeks passed, the colony began to rebuild. New homes rose where the old ones had fallen. Fields were cleared for planting again. Markets reopened, though smaller and quieter than before. Life returned slowly, carrying with it the heavy weight of memory. The humans continued their work, repairing what could be repaired, replacing what was lost. But when their warships finally prepared to leave, many colonists felt both relief and unease. Relief, because the terrifying presence of the Deathworlders would no longer hang over their daily lives. Unease, because now they knew what it truly meant to call for human help. They knew that if humanity answered, it would never be gentle, never soft. Their way of protecting was to unleash war with a fury unlike anything else in the galaxy. Even long after the last human ship vanished into the stars, their legacy remained. Children would grow up retelling the stories of the war. Some would speak with awe of the mighty saviors who came in their darkest hour. Others would whisper warnings, be careful what you wish for, because when you ask humanity for help, you do not just get aid, you get the storm. The colony was alive, yes, but survival had come at a cost that could never be forgotten. They had been saved by Deathworlders, and that truth would echo through their history forever. The story of the colony's rescue did not stay hidden for long. News traveled quickly among the stars, carried by traders, diplomats, and survivors who could not keep silent about what they had seen. What had begun as a desperate signal for help became a tale retold in every port, on every station, and across every world. And everywhere it spread, people reacted with a mix of awe, gratitude, and fear. Some spoke of humanity as heroes. They said no other species had answered the call. Many had heard the plea for help but ignored it, unwilling to risk their fleets or their lives for a colony so far away. Only the humans had come, and when they came, they had fought with a ferocity that shattered the enemy and saved countless lives. To these voices, humanity was proof that hope still existed in the galaxy, that when darkness closed in, there were still those willing to fight back against it. On worlds far from the conflict, young ones gathered around storytellers who described the great human warships, massive and scarred, descending from the skies like metal giants. They imagined soldiers who fought like predators, unafraid of pain, who turned defeat into victory through sheer willpower. To some, these were tales of inspiration. They began to believe that if humans could face such terror and survive, perhaps they too could find strength when their own darkest days came. But not everyone saw the story as one of hope. Alongside the praise came whispers of warning. Leaders in distant star systems asked each other what it truly meant to invite humans into a war. Yes, they saved the colony, some said, but look at the cost. They pointed to the ruins left behind, the shattered cities, the burned fields, the fear that lingered even in the hearts of the saved. Humanity's way of protecting was inseparable from their way of destroying. Wherever they fought, the line between salvation and devastation blurred. In council halls and senate chambers, debates raged. Should humanity be welcomed as defenders of the weak, or should they be feared as a storm too wild to control? Some argued that desperate times required desperate allies, and who better than the Deathworlders who never surrendered, who never broke, who fought until the enemy was ash. Others countered that relying on humanity was like unleashing fire. It might burn your enemies, but it could just as easily consume you as well. The story of the colony became a lesson. Parents told their children, if you call for humans, be certain you are ready for what comes. Captains told their crews, pray you never face Deathworlders on the battlefield, whether as friend or foe. And in whispers across taverns and marketplaces, ordinary people said, we are glad they are on our side. But what if one day they are not? For the colony itself, the truth was simpler. They remembered the terror of the siege, the despair of believing no one would come, and then the sudden arrival of humanity. They remembered the roar of engines, the thunder of weapons, and the fire that lit the skies. They remembered soldiers who fought like beasts unleashed, who tore apart the enemy with a savagery that both saved and scarred them. They remembered the moment they realized that their backup was not what they had imagined, but far more powerful, far more terrifying. Even as they rebuilt, even as they planted new crops and raised new homes, the memory never faded. Survivors would look at the sky and recall the silhouettes of human warships hanging above, waiting like predators ready to strike. Children who had seen human soldiers in the ruins would grow up telling their own children, "It was the Deathworlders who came. We are alive because of them." Their voices would carry a mixture of pride, gratitude, and unease because they knew their survival had been bought not with gentle aid, but with fury. Generations later, the story would still be told. Some would call it a tale of heroes, of a desperate colony saved by humanity's unbreakable spirit. Others would call it a warning, a reminder that when humans come, war follows. But for those who lived through it, one truth was forever etched into their history. When they asked for backup, when they begged the stars for help, the answer that came was not fleets of healers or convoys of food. It was humanity, forged by a death world arriving in steel and fire. And so the legend spread across the galaxy. Some raised their glasses to humanity, calling them saviors. Others lowered their voices, warning of their fury. But everyone, whether in admiration or fear, spoke the same word when the story was told. Deathworlders.